Okay, so I think most people are in now, and if not, we'll just carry on admitting. But let's begin. So, hello, good evening to everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. I'm Rebecca Taylor, the editor of Jewish Renaissance magazine. Welcome to our event tonight to launch our autumn issue of Jewish Renaissance. The theme of our new magazine is Jewish life in the northern Italian city of Ferrara. And tonight we'll be focusing on the city's Jewish heritage, as well as hearing about the community today. And just to tell you that some of the lovely images that you'll be seeing tonight are from our photographer in Ferrara, Tim Berezin. So many thanks to Tim for his beautiful photos. But before we head to Italy, I'm going to give you a little taster of the other features in the magazine and to give you a little whistle-stop tour of the latest issue. We've got some pages from the magazine to show you. So I'll just take you through some of our other pieces. This is our cover, and I'll tell you more about the cover in a minute. It's all about our artists, and I'll explain more about that soon. So the first feature that I'm going to show you is a piece by the Israeli writer Sarai Shavit, and she writes about the Israeli writers, musicians, artists, filmmakers who've been involved in campaigns calling for an end to the war in Gaza, as well as showing solidarity with Palestinians who've been killed and injured in the conflict, and also campaigning for the hostages to come home. So this includes writers that you might know, such as Ayelet Sabari and Joanna Chen. And Joanna has been driving Palestinians from the West Bank to receive medical care in Israel. And it's a very good and thoughtful article about what's going on recently. Obviously, things have been changing, but it's still a very good and pertinent read. So now to move on to our cover, actually, and the feature that's connected to the cover about our artists. So since the beginning of this year, we have run a program called Artist Development Scheme, JR's Artist Development Scheme. And this program supports Jewish artists in the UK. It's the first time we've done it. We invited applicants to send in their work and they were interviewed. And from them, we chose, from about 70 applicants, we chose 6 working artists to take part in our scheme. And what does the scheme do? Let me tell you a little bit about that. So we have offered masterclasses, seminars, workshops for artists, as well as supporting them financially to create new work. Now, some of that work is going to be shown at a special art exhibition we're holding at Calder Contemporary Gallery in London. You can come along and see their work, meet the artists, and you can find out more about that on our website. If you look under our event, you can book a ticket to come and see their show and to come to the opening and closing parties. It's free, but you have to register. And Aviva, our executive director, would tell you a little bit more about this at the end of tonight's programme. So in this feature, we speak to the 6 winning artists. You can see them all here, and we hear more about their work and their inspiration. Some of them drawing on their Jewish heritage for the first time, others delving into family history that they've known about but haven't been able to express through their art until now. So it's a lovely programme. And we hope to see you at the exhibition in November. Okay, moving on to our music section. We have pieces on 2 books that are exploring the Jewish influences, among other things, on 2 of the greatest contemporary songwriters, Carole King and Bob Dylan. And these books look at how they've embraced or rejected their heritage in their work and life over the years. And if you like these artists, you'll be very interested. Okay, moving on to our art section, we go to Plymouth and we get lost in Jill Bradley's maze of plexiglass and plastic and light and hear about how aspects of the Kabbalah have influenced her very contemporary work. That's on in Plymouth, if anyone is in that region. Moving into our book section, we have an interview with the Israeli novelist Maya Arad. She talks about writing after the 7th of October, as she's an Israeli writer living in the States, so what that's like living away from Israel, especially at the moment. And that's a lovely interview by our writer Hepzibah Anderson. So moving on to our Sephardi section, in every issue, we have a section that explores Sephardi culture and news around the world. And in this issue, one of our features we speak to the Jewish community in Thessaloniki and hear their thoughts on Greece's first Holocaust museum, which is due to open in the city in 2027. And we look at some of the controversies around that and how it's bringing back memories of life under Nazi occupation for former Thessaloniki residents. And we also have a book review that talks about what it was like being in the city during the Second World War by a boy who, or, you know, a man, Tony Mohol, who was in hiding at the time during the war. So this is a little run through of our other sections, but let's go now to Ferrara, the beautiful city in the north of Italy, and the theme of our event tonight. JR is taking tour groups to visit Ferrara and Venice next year, so this seemed like a good moment to focus on the city. And again, our executive director will tell you more about these tours if you're interested at the end of the event. And we'll put up the web link to find out more about those in our chat, so have a look there. So we'll be visiting those cities, and as a lead up to that, we've done a delve into the Jewish history and culture and the present day community. The city is also home to Italy's relatively new National Jewish Museum and Holocaust Centre, and we'll be hearing a bit more about that. And David Abulafia, whom we'll hear from soon, writes about the medieval and early Renaissance history of the city. And in the 20th century, the city was also the backdrop for the novels of Giorgio Bassani. You might know his 1962 novel, The Garden of the Finzi-Continis, which was made into a film by Vittorio De Sica. And the page that we have on now is some of the members of the city's very small present-day community. So there is a community there today, and they're very dynamic, even though there are not so many of them. There are a few who I've seen have joined us tonight, and hopefully we'll get to speak to them and hear about the community today later on. So in a minute, we'll go to our two special guests who'll be telling us about Ferrara in more detail. That's the historian David Abulafia and the director of the National Museum of Italian Judaism and the Shoah, Amedeo Spagnoletto. So this is also just to remind you that while our guests are speaking, send in your questions to them via the Zoom comments box. We'll put them to our speakers at the end of the session. And that is all from me for the minute. We'll go over now to David Abulafia. I'm delighted to welcome David to our event tonight. So David is Emeritus Professor of Mediterranean History at Cambridge and the author of Frederick II, The Western Mediterranean Kingdoms and the Great Sea. His latest book, The Boundless Sea, A Human History of the Oceans, won the Wolfson History Prize in 2020. So we're delighted to welcome you tonight, David, and you're going to tell us a little bit about the early history, the early Jewish history of Ferrara.
Yes, indeed. What I thought I would do is talk in the first instance about Ferrara in the late Middle Ages at a time when it really hadn't quite reached the sort of peak of its cultural importance as a centre of Jewish life. And then I'll say something about the transformation that occurred, which meant that in the 16th century, the Jewish community had a very different flavour to what had been there before. the first reference to Jews in Ferrara appears, this is a bit uncertain, there's some sort of reference around 1088, but we do know that Jews were given certain sort of immunities in 1275, so allowed to come into the city, trade, and so on. But at this time, it's very important to understand that the Jewish population in Italy was very heavily concentrated in an area where it's not very visible at all nowadays, which was the south, the kingdom of Naples and the island, another kingdom, kingdom of Sicily. These two kingdoms really were the great centers of Jewish life in this period. And bear that in mind because it has a relationship to what actually happened from 1492 onwards. So there was a very light sort of sprinkling of Jewish communities in the north of Italy compared to what you found in the south. Now, this began to change in the 14th century, really after the Black Death, after the middle of the 14th century. We begin to find in what was a heavily commercialized society in which banking institutions, the Italians themselves, the Italian Christians, were very active in banking within the Mediterranean and as far away as England and Ireland. But we begin to see these loan banks emerging, which cater for the needs of people rather lower down the social scale than the kings and archbishops and so on, who were being catered for by the Italian merchants. And Ferrara was one of the places where we begin to see this transformation with the development of loan banks. And this was something that became particularly associated with Jews in this period. Now, it was also a source of tension because there were those who, arguing from the position of the Catholic Church, which deplored what was called usury, the levying of unfair interest, regarded the Jewish involvement in this as a sort of insult to Christianity. However, what benefited the Jews in Ferrara and neighboring cities, because the Dukes of Ferrara also became Dukes of Modena nearby and other towns in the region, but we're concentrating on Ferrara, was the protection of these dukes, an ancient noble family, the Este family, which had ruled in the region for many centuries, but they began to give their protection to the Jews. And this is where the issue becomes a little bit more complicated because some historians have tended to argue that they did this out of self-interest. In other words, they began to use the wealthier members of the Jewish community as sources of loans. And that may be part of the story, but we do seem to see, in my view, the build-up of a tradition of relative tolerance towards the Jews, the acceptance that they could live in what was a predominantly Christian community under the protection of the ruler, which should prevent the outbreak of hostility against them. But there was hostility against them. So don't assume that just because the ruler is giving his protection, don't assume that this was an ideal situation. So, for instance, in 1376, we have a poem attacking the Jews. In the same sort of period, we have people in Ferrara attacking Shechita. We have a lot of discussion about how circumcision was regarded as not just outmoded, but very, very hostile comments about Jewish rituals. And we even find that bankers were murdered, one in the town of Reggio Emilia, nearby in 1476, and another one in 1480 in Ferrara itself. And then the next year, 1481, a blood libel, a child disappearing, a child being killed rather, and the assumption that the Jews were guilty of this, which mirrored the accusations which only a few years earlier had been circulating after the blood libel of Trent in northern Italy. Now, what's really interesting in the case of the blood libel is a crowd came out onto the street and began to attack the Jewish area of the city. And first of all, the Duke's brother, Sigismondo, and then the Duke himself came out to stop the riot. And when one of the rioters cried out, kill the pessimi Judei, the dreadful Jews, the Duke actually drew his sword and chased the man away. So that gives you some idea of their willingness to ensure that the Jews could live safely in the city. Well, the first picture I want to show you, can we have that on the screen? Yeah, this picture of the Virgin Mary on a throne by a very prominent artist. He lived between 1430 and I think 1495, something like that. Cosme Tura. The number of very interesting features of it. Unfortunately, you can't see the whole of it in this image because lower down on the steps, there are all sorts of little allusions to one of the Psalms, Psalm 132, which seem to be an attempt to show how Christianity has displaced Judaism. So a picture, a lantern, an image of a lantern, and that seems to relate to a phrase in that particular psalm, I have ordained a lantern for my anointed. And who is the anointed? Of course, he's the baby on the lap of the Virgin Mary. And what we also see, of course, which will have struck you immediately, is this very careful depiction of the Ten Commandments. And in this period, it's quite common to see Hebrew script in paintings in Italy, Spain, and elsewhere. But this is so meticulously done that one's bound to ask what sort of help was given by the Jewish community. However, it's been pointed out by an art historian that there's something very interesting about the Ten Commandments. The head of Jesus actually obscures the commandment against the graven image, and therefore this seems to engage with debates within the Christian community about whether that particular commandment had somehow lapsed, lost its meaning, and things like that. So this was commissioned in 1476. Right, so 1476 is only a few years before the great transformation that did occur in the Jewish community of Ferrara. And this occurred as a result of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Up to that point, the city was inhabited by Jews, what we call the Italkim, the Italian communities, and also by Ashkenazim, people coming down from Germany in quite considerable numbers, setting up the loan banks. But in 1492, as Jews expelled from Spain started to arrive on the shores of Italy, a great many of them arrived in the south, where King Ferrante, whose daughter, we'll come to her in a minute, was Duchess of Ferrara. King Ferrante of Naples, the cousin of Ferdinand, the guy who'd actually expelled the Jews from Spain, he actually welcomed the Jews. But a group of Jews took, as it were, the wrong turning and ended up in Genoa, which did not have a good reputation for welcoming Jews in this period. And so the Jews there who arrived as refugees were confined on the mole in the harbour, and they had an extremely difficult time there. Anyway, the news of this came through to Eleonora, and after lots of delay and no doubt lots of discussion in court, an agreement was made that a number of Jews, 22 named individuals, but then their families as well, could come and settle in Ferrara. And we know that there was a rabbi called Aben Abias from that family, and there were a number of Abulafias as well, one of whom is described as a sort of tax collector. So they'd carefully chosen the people. Obviously, the rabbi, that'd be useful for the Jewish community. The tax collector, maybe that would be useful for the court, for giving the sort of support that somebody like that might well have been giving to princes and even kings in Spain. So we have the, can we go on to the next image? Go on to the next image. Yeah, the plaque. if you can't read the plaque now, but the plaque actually on the outer wall of the Sephardi synagogue, which was built not immediately, it does set out this story quite nicely. So I thought it was worth showing that. And then if we move on to the next image, we have, let me see, yeah, here is, sorry, the Duchess Eleonora of Aragonese ancestry, of Spanish ancestry. So she came from a family which, I mean, they, being of Spanish origin, they knew about how to create a society in which Jews could sort of live peacefully and function under the protection of the ruler. So she was really sort of insisting that this group should come here. And it's very interesting that the language she used is, to my mind, almost the same as the language that her father had been using in Naples to welcome Jews into his enormous kingdom of southern Italy. This, of course, a much smaller state, but quite an important player in the politics of Italy in this period. So she is, from my perspective, I suppose, the heroine of the story, who's decided to allow this group of Sephardim into the city. They were not allowed to function as loan bankers. They would have to pursue other sorts of activities. So, so there was a separation being maintained between them and Jews, and that was maintained further by the fact that each of these communities developed its own synagogue. I mean, the whole question of having permission to have a synagogue, we could go into that, a very complicated issue. Right, so as a result of this, Sephardim began to migrate towards Ferrara from wherever they had sort of ended up in the Mediterranean after the expulsion, and along with them, those who had actually converted in Spain, the conversos or marranos, who many of whom wanted to get out of Spain, out of the clutches of the Inquisition. That included also Jews from Portugal. So we see in the 16th century how that community became very active in the cultural life of Jewish Italy, if I can put it that way. And two particular books come to mind. So can we have the next image? Yeah. The Bible, and it really was printed. I mean, this is just a sort of, as well, mock-up from a photograph, but it was really printed, the luxury edition, on blue paper. You know, this was the really special edition. The first complete translation of the Hebrew Bible into Spanish. It's called the Ladino Bible of Ferrara, 1553. It's not really Ladino, which is a word we would use for the sort of Judeo-Spanish dialects that developed within the Mediterranean. It's actually, by and large, sort of 15th century Spanish, Castilian Spanish. And it actually had considerable influence also on the next generation of translators, Christian translators. They often used it as a point of reference. It was produced under the patronage of Doña Gracia Nassi, a very important figure, a woman who eventually ended up in the court in Constantinople, the Ottoman court. But she herself had had this extraordinary career in Flanders and Portugal and now Italy, and was a great patroness of culture. And we can look perhaps at the next page as well, just to see what the ordinary printed pages looked like. Yeah, so this is a page from the book of Jonah. I just sort of chose it at random, but that gives you some idea of the appearance. And in addition, around the same time, around 1550, a Portuguese exile, a man called Samuel Usque, he produced a book, Consolation for the Tribulations of Israel, which is a sort of history of the Jewish people, which is composed in the form of sort of dialogue about why have we suffered so much? Where's all this going to lead? And in a way, which is actually quite typical of the Sephardim in the 16th century, this idea that the tremendous blow, the traumatic experience of expulsion from Spain and Portugal was actually the harbinger of a new era which would culminate in the liberation of the Jews, coming of the Messiah, and so on. So the 16th century we can think of as a high point. Later on, we're looking at a period of papal rule and ghettoization and so on. There's some evidence that the Jewish community developed its own quite distinctive features compared to the neighboring population. And the thing that particularly fascinated me, on which I'd like to close, is that there was indeed a Ferraran Jewish cuisine. Well, you might say, of course there was. However, one of the things which the rabbis, after a certain amount of discussion, they did decide was kosher, was sturgeon caviar. And apparently, until quite recently, you could actually buy kosher sturgeon caviar. Probably, I won't say quite recently, probably we're going back, I don't know, 50, 70, 80 years, something, in the shops of Ferrara in the old ghetto. So I'll leave it there and hand over to Professor Spagnoletto.
Thank you very much, David. And yes, that's an enticing thought to think of the kosher caviar. But also thanks for telling us about your own family connection to Ferrara and this very unusual experience, it sounds, for Jews in Ferrara compared to elsewhere in Italy. So thank you for that. And we will now go to Amedeo. So Amedeo Spagnoletto, who is with us now from Ferrara, is the director of the National Museum of Italian Judaism and the Shoah, known as MEIS, based in Ferrara. He is also a rabbi and a sofer, a scribe, and also studied at the School of Library Science of the Vatican Library. He was the chief rabbi of the Jewish community of Florence and has also written extensively about Italian Jewry. Before Amedeo begins to tell us a little bit about the museum and the community in Ferrara, we're going to see a short video from him about the museum.
Hi. Oh, wait, let's wait. I may share this one, but I don't know if you see me right now. Perhaps yes,
Yes,
Microsoft report.
yes, we can
Okay,
see.
nice, nice, nice. First of all, thank you. I am very, very, very glad for this opportunity of sharing with you some words about our museum. And after the wise lecture of Professor Abulafia, I really feel myself a little embarrassed. And sorry also for the English, that my English is not so good. But anyway, I hope that you understand when I speak. Let's begin. Yes, I will speak about our museum. You saw a little movie about it, and you saw something that was connected with one of the exhibition that we had 2 or 3 years ago, focusing on the period of the ghetto. And so come out very, very fine that I begin to speak about the museum exactly by the point that Professor Abulafia ends his lectures. Now, let's begin by the beginning. If I presentazione, animazione. Visualizza presentazione dall'inizio. Ok, I hope that it is okay. You see our first slides. I want to share with you some slides about the museum. Now, let's begin about the founding of the museum. The museum was founded on the 2003 by a law ruled by the Italian Parliament, and one voice, it means unanimously by the two wings of the Italian Parliament. And one of the object of the museum, the objective of funding the museum was to bear witnesses of the events that have characterized the 2000 years of the Jewish presence in Italy. And our museum is focusing on two important issues. On one hand, the history of the Jewish people in Italy, and the other hand also to be witnesses of the Italian Shoah. So it's important that among the situation here in Italy, where there were a lot of Jewish museums, almost all of them belonged to the Jewish communities. This is and was the first Italian Jewish museum, speaking about the Judaism, that belongs to the Ministry of Culture and of other institutions of the foundation. The foundation is connected with the Ministry of the Culture and with the region Emilia-Romagna, where is placed Ferrara, and the municipality of Ferrara itself, and the Union of the Jewish Communities in Italy. And this foundation organizes a lot of things, and you will see about but the most important things is of course the conducting the life of our museum. One of the things that sometimes we are asking to answer is why was chosen Ferrara as a town to establish the National Jewish Museum. For sure, everybody thinks that the capital, Roma, or perhaps Milano in the north, could be better choice about funding the Jewish Museum. But we found out that there are at least three reasons that brought the parliaments to establish the National Jewish Museum in Ferrara. The first of all is something that already Professor Abulafia told you. It means that the presence of the Jewish community in Ferrara that is present in the city by the 12th centuries, in the Middle Age, and after remain very, very compacted, very, very strong, and live during all the centuries after. And therefore, and also because Ferrara, for example, conserve an intact Jewish neighborhood. The ghetto of Ferrara is one of the ghettos in Italy that is well preserved, and you already still today you can walk on all the streets that were part of the ghetto without any changement, and this is really important. And therefore Ferrara connect together the Jewish life, the Jewish neighborhood, and now they also the Jewish National Museum. And this is one of the reason that I thought that brought the parliaments to choose Ferrara as a town of the National Museum. The second thing is that is a good point, a good place in Italy where you connect and you can attractive the schools from all over Italy, from the north, from other regions nearby, like Veneto, like Toscana, and Marche as well, and other close regions that where the schools can reach Ferrara with easily. And therefore, one of the tasks of the museum is to bring schools, students to explain them, to learn them, the Jewish life and also the Jewish history in Italy. And therefore, I think that Ferrara is a lucky position inside Italy. Of course, for the students that are far away from the capital, Roma, where there are other attractive sides of the Jewish life, or perhaps also more attractive than Ferrara. The third reason that I can share with you is the strength of the Finzi-Contini, the garden of Finzi-Contini, and in general of Bassani, the writer Bassani, and through the book, through the movie that was mentioned before at the beginning of our meeting, Ferrara has a very deep heritage, and that is still live inside the city and inside the world. And therefore, I think that the connection to Ferrara with the Jewish life is broadcast everywhere through the writer Giorgio Bassani and through his books. And with this map, I want to show you where is displayed, where is placed the Jewish Museum. That, as you can see, is a little bit out from the heart of the city, but is a distance of 10 minutes walk, less perhaps, by the ghetto. And the two is the castle, and like the number 3 is more or less the place where there is the synagogue. Therefore, you can park outside the city and to get inside the museum, and afterwards you can visit the city that is very, very close and reachable by foot. Now, where is placed our museum? It's placed basically in a previous building that was connected with a prison. This was a jail during all the 20th century, was built at the beginning of the 20th centuries and remained to be a prison, a jail, during all the centuries. It means that it was a jail also during the period of the Shoah, the fascist period, and during the deportation. And this is important. After I will mention something interesting about this fact. But this was as was at the beginning, at the end of the 20th century, when was they gave up the use of the prison as a prison, because they built another important prison outside the city, far away from the center. And so this prison was abandoned, and they restored it in order to be the National Museum of the Judaism. Giorgio Bassani and also other figures like him, like Matilde Bassani or Corrado Israel de Benedetti, were all of them Jewish people who were jailed, were imprisoned inside the prison during the fascist period, as people who were active against the fascist thought, fascist ideology, and fascist parties. Therefore, during the year 42, 43, they were jailed inside the prison. And before the deportation period, they escaped after the fall of the fascist parties on the 25 July 43. They could escape from the jail and survive the Shoah. And Giorgio Bassani, as you know, is one of the most important writers here in Ferrara itself and inside the Jewish Italian world, and therefore is a real attractive figure for Ferrara itself and for the National Jewish Museum in Ferrara. Now, 2 slides to inform you about the history, the recent history of the Jewish community. The Jewish community reached the peak of more than 1,000 people at the end of the 19th centuries and the beginning of the 20th centuries. And they were really operated inside the society with very important tasks, and there were several professionists active inside the city. And it's enough to think that between the 1926 and 1938, in Ferrara, the mayor, the Podestà, was Renzo Ravenna, one of the member of the Jewish community. Of course, in the 1938, when come out the racial laws promulgated in the September, Renzo Ravenna, few months before, had to give up his position as mayor in the city. What happened during the Shoah? More than 100 people were deported to the death camps, and very few people came back to the city. And also there was a big, deep reduction of the people, the Jewish people living in the city. Also before the Shoah, during between the 20s and the 30s of the 20th centuries, several Jewish families from Ferrara settled elsewhere, also because Ferrara was not anymore an important city as was before in the circle of the towns inside Italy. Nevertheless, the community was always very active, also during the Shoah, in order to survive. Several of them escaped to Switzerland, and other were hidden in the territory and outside the city. But more than, as I told, more than 100 people were deported and died in the death camps, specifically in Auschwitz, as the majority, almost all the Jewish Italian Jewish people deported to the death camps. But after the war, the Jewish community reorganized itself and could survive, and still is very active nowadays. I saw that among the audience there is one of the director of the board of Ferrara, Samuele Lampronti, that after he wants to give voice and to say something about the life in Ferrara inside the community, is one of the people that his profile is presented in your news magazine that was presented before. Let's see, the inauguration of our museum was in 2017 with an exhibition focusing on the first 1,000 of life of the Jewish life in Italy, and was inaugurated by the President of Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, as you can see. Now is seeing the bas relief of the Titus Arch. This is the exhibition that we have in our museum. And after, we had other important exhibition during these 6-7 years, and one was devoted to the Renaissance. The third one was about the ghettos. Afterwards, we had an important exhibition about the 20th centuries, and now our task is to put together all these segments of composed our exhibition that were shown until now, and to give in a couple of years a new unique complete exhibition about all the 2,000 more Jewish life here in Italy. As you can see, the entrance of our museum begin by showing the land of Israel, the call to Abraham, and afterwards focus immediately about the arriving of the Jewish people here in Italy in the 2nd century before Christ. Another exhibition focusing on the Shoah, Italian Shoah, and with comparison between two soldiers who combated together in the one World War, and after their life were divided by one was Jews, the second was no Jews, and the Russian laws divided their life. They were friends, but after the 38, they had different faiths, and the Jewish combated again, of course, had to live with the Russian law, and after should escape and to save himself and his family by the Shoah. We have other interesting exhibition right now. We have an important exhibition, photographic exhibition, and one of the cities that we show is, of course, Ferrara, but we have a lot of other towns from Italy. And as you can see, is the presentation of two important collections, one coming from the Hungarian Jewish Museum, and the other one was gathered between the 1927 and 1940 by the association, the Cultural Association of the Jewish Cultural Association. These collections were kept without importance. Let's say like this. And we completed the restoring of the images, the photographs, and now we are presenting through an important exhibition in our museum. And therefore, if you come the next spring, you could see this important exhibition for the first time, photographs presented to our visitors. Outside the museum, we have a very wide and important, and we are really very we have this garden, and it's called the Garden of Questions, and we are proud. Sorry, I lack the word. We are very proud about the garden. It's the Garden of Questions, and it's focusing on the rules of the kashrut. And through the rules of kashrut, we want to transmit and to teach to the students the importance of the Jewish traditions in the Jewish world. And there is like a labyrinth. The students get inside the labyrinth, and they learn about Jewish laws, traditions, and also Italian Jewish cuisines. Sometimes our collaboration is in the city with several institutions. For example, on your left, you have the collaboration that we had recently, a couple of years ago. The museum put the flowers for Shavuot in the both institutions, in the shule, in the synagogue, the Ashkenazic synagogue inside the community building, and elsewhere inside the museum. And therefore the collaboration was very, very appreciated by the Jewish people, by the non-Jewish peoples coming to visit the floral the floral seeing of the Arona Kodesh. And sometimes, since in the city there are several buildings that belong to the Jewish people that are any more in the city, sometimes we organize tours inside the city for seeing and to see the roots of these families. And for example, for instance, this is a visit of the Renato Hirsch, an important Jewish person during the World War II, discovering his Dimor, his building. And I end the slides, and I wanted to figure out the things that we have, even if in Ferrara itself we have living here something like perhaps less than 50 Jewish people. Nevertheless, the Jewish community is very, very active. They have minyan. Sometimes I join with them. Usually I go back to my family that living in Rome. But when I can, I join the services here during Shabbat, and sometimes they arrive to meet to have minyan. The synagogue is open every Shabbat. There is the chief rabbi of Ferrara that really is a strong people, even if he is aged. And as much as they can be active with the numbers that they have, I think that Ferrara could be considered a really an example of don't forgive and don't give up about living a Jewish life in a medium town as can be Ferrara in Italy.
Thank you, Amedeo. Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you so much. So you've taken us up to date in the Jewish history, following on from David's talk, and also thank you for telling us and showing us so much about your wonderful museum that I hope we'll be visiting. Well, I know we will be visiting on our trips, and hopefully people, if they can't make the trip, will now have a taste of the museum and also be wanting, I'm sure, to go there too. So you mentioned that we do have some people with us, some people watching tonight who live or have connections with the city, and I thought it would be great if we could hear from them. So could we hear from Diana Michaelis and also Shemuel Lampronti? If you don't mind being brought up on the screen, Diana and Shemuel, and perhaps I'll ask a few questions about the current day community and what life is like there now. So we've got Shemuel and also Diana. Hello, both of you. So, Diana, I know you have moved from Paris to Ferrara. Could you tell us briefly what it's like? What are your impressions of Ferrara and what it's been like moving there from a different country and coming to live in this new and unusual Jewish community?
Hi everyone, good evening. So yeah, I've been moving from Paris and Paris suburb to Ferrara like a year ago, and in the beginning we were a bit anxious about how small is the community and the organization and eating kosher, etc. When you come from a big city like Paris, you have everything next door. And so I had to organize a bit. But then I discovered right away that it was a very welcoming community, and every festival we had a really warm atmosphere. From the beginning, we were welcomed and invited to share the meal, to share a coffee, to have a little moment with people. Everyone had something to share with us, and it was really really nice and very warm. And I was saying something to Shmuel and his wife Jenny during the last festival that it's funny, but since I'm in Ferrara, I'm actually going more to the synagogue than when I was in Paris. And I bring my son, and we always had a very good moment, and we are happy to be here. It's a great experience.
Thank you, Diana. Lovely. That's good to hear. And you can read more about Diana's thoughts in the magazine where we've got a little profile of her. And Shmuel, you have very long links with Ferrara. Your family has connections going back generations to the city. Is that right? Can you just tell us briefly about that family connection?
Oh, yes, indeed. So my family arrived from Germany into Italy, northeastern Italy. So first the Veneto region in the 16th century, late 15th, early 16th century, and then moved progressively south until one branch established itself in Ferrara, where it took the current surname of Lampronti, and the family has remained there from that time until my father, who was still born there. So quite a long line of continuity in the same place. Not myself actually, because I was my father moved to Turin. I was born in Turin, grew up in Turin, and then well, I did the opposite move as Diana. I moved to Paris for my PhD, and then I'm currently working in the UK. So I do not live in Ferrara, nor have I ever lived in Ferrara. But you've heard about the warmth of the community and the liveliness relative to its size by Amedeo and by Diana. And yeah, I'm very glad to hear that, because it's the same thing I feel. And I feel it so much that since I was a kid, my family and I have always spent all Jewish holidays in Ferrara. We go back there several times a year. And all of us actually feel home there more than anywhere else, even those of us like my brother and I who have never actually lived there. So that's really home, even without being as often as we would like physically there. One of the little contributions, Amedeo quickly mentioned it, that I can offer to the community is that since a lot of the administrative job can be done remotely, I have been sitting for the last 4 years in the board of the community. Plus, whenever I'm there, I'm also a Chazan, a cantor in the synagogue, and any other kind of little help that I can offer to the community, I'm very glad to offer, because I feel it to be my real home.
Thank you, Shmuel. And yes, and also you can hear about Shmuel and some of the work he does with Ferrara also in the magazine. He's very involved. So just let's keep you all on the screen for the moment, if that's okay. And to tell our audience that you can still send in questions if you would like to put any questions to David or Amedeo or to Shmuel and Diana. And actually, we do have one. Yes, just to remind you, you can put them into the chat on Zoom, the chat function. We do have one for Diana, a question for you, asking, why did you move there, Diana?
My microphone is working, yeah. So first, because my partner got a job in the area in Yolanda di Savoia, which is a little village in the middle of the rice fields, and it was out of questions to go in this village. We selected Ferrara first because of the little Jewish community, and second because Ferrara is a beautiful city. And fun fact, I didn't come to visit the city before to live actually in the city, and it's not a disappointment. It's really beautiful. Also, we were in Paris and we got Nazi cross Swatiskas on our door. So we got really scared because we have a son who is little, and also it was very scary for this reason, and we decided not to be giving our son his childhood being in an area where he can be in danger. So we moved to Italy also because my husband being Italian was a easier choice.
Thank you, Diana. I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience in Paris. That's an awful experience. But on that note, could I just very briefly ask, what is the relationship like between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community in the city these days? I know it's been a difficult one, as Amedeo implied with his talk, because the city did have links to fascism, to fascist leaders. But maybe Amedeo and Shmuel, maybe you can tell us, Shmuel, how do you find it? Let's start with you, perhaps. And how do you find it, first of all, the relationship between the Jewish and non-Jewish residents of this city?
Well, in general, it's quite positive. The relationship with the current municipality administration is very tight, very warm, and like bidirectionally very appreciated. So the relations are definitely good. No place in the world is perfect, so there are sometimes unpleasant episodes, like especially during the last war, some unpleasant graffiti by pro-Palestinian activists that were very quickly removed by the municipal administration. But yes, these events happen pretty much, I think, everywhere in the world. I think that compared to plenty of other major places, both in Italy and in the rest of Europe, the situation from this point of view, from the point of view of the relationship between the community and the non-Jewish community and the majority of the local residents, is overall in a better position than the average situation in most other places in Europe. I don't know whether Amedeo's take is the same, because probably we complement each other, right, in the type of relationship we have. Because one is from the point of view of the community, the other is more from the point of view of the museum. So you are probably more tightly interconnected with the institutions through the museum. So I'd like to also have the other take, but this is mine.
Okay, yes, Amedeo.
But I can add something. Yes, I can add something. I agree with Shemuel Lampronti of the goodness of the relationship, the institutional relationship. Now, about the last 2 years, of course, we beard, and especially this last year, had a reduction of the coming of among the students, among the classes of the schools, and also because they embraced the cause of the Palestinian cause through the war, and sometimes there are demonstrations in the center of the city, but basically we didn't have any public controversial point of view against the museum. Therefore, we are hoping, for example, the beginning of this year, the educational year, now by September, we thought that we could have a very big reduction of the visitors, the Italian visitors and the schools. At the moment, we don't see it, and we are very, very happy that the consequences of the demonstrations that were here in Italy, and the really hardest situation that in general in Italy, as well as in other countries we lived during these 2 years, now is shortly is changing, and we hope that in about 1 year, hoping that the peace is continuing to be, we can raise the numbers of the visitors right now. About the second, there are other two questions. One is the the close Jewish museum in Bologna, that also there is not the Jewish museum of the community, but is Jewish museum of institutions of the municipality and also the Jewish community of Bologna. And we are in very strict relationship and we organize several activities together. And of course, this is a Jewish museum there in Bologna. There is a Jewish museum, and we are the national museum with different tasks and different relationship with institutions. And but you know, Bologna is a city bigger than Ferrara, and they can make also higher number of visitors because they are placed in Bologna, and we are in Ferrara. But without this point of view, I think that we have different tasks, different ways of acting in face of the visitors and the schools, and therefore it's a good thing that even if far away of 50 kilometers there are two different institutions like the Jewish Museum.
Thank you, Amedeo. I'm just going to go on to Brielle Collins' question, actually, about the difference between Italian Jew. Why do some Italian Jews not associate themselves as Ashkenazi or Sephardi? Maybe David Abulafia, might you have some
Yes.
perspective on this?
Yes, indeed. The Italian Nusach, Italian rituals, liturgy, and so on is very ancient, and you can still experience it. I don't know which one they follow in Ferrara, but if you go to Rome, you
The
have
Italian
a
one. The Italian one.
Italian one. Oh, very good,
currently.
very good.
It's the one remaining of the we had all three, but the remaining one is the Italian one.
I'm very glad to hear it. And so, although in many ways it is closer to the Ashkenazi in terms of the content, it's always seemed to me as a Sephardi going to an Italian synagogue that the the actual ritual, the way, for instance, the Torah, the Hagbeh, everything like that is much closer to the way Sephardim do things. I think that reflects the way that when the Sephardim came in, they bullied everybody they could get hold of into trying to do things their way. So we have this tripartite division. So the Italian Haftarah may be different from the one that's being read in Sephardi synagogues, which may again be different from the one being read in Ashkenazi synagogues. And Kol Nidre, Kol Nidarim, it's done in Hebrew in the Roman, in the Italian liturgy. And then there are all sorts of issues, whether it's sins of the previous year, sins of the coming year, and in that respect, it's closer to the Sephardi way of doing it. So as I understand it, I mean, Amedeo can put me right if I've got this wrong, but in many ways, the Italian rite is ancestral to the Ashkenazi rite, that as Jews moved northwards out of the peninsula over the Alps, they carried with them a great deal of what we now think of as the Italian rite, and then adapted that and made all sorts of changes. I mean, most notably the change in pronunciation, which, as I say in my article in Jewish Renaissance, is probably one of the things that made the Sephardim feel that they needed their own rabbi and everything like that.
Thank you, David. And just because time is moving on, so we'll just quickly go to a few of these other questions. One from Eva Fromovic. She asks, to what degree will the museum confront controversial issues such as betrayal and collaboration during the Shoah?
Yes. We collaborate. It's specifically here in Ferrara. There were not so a very deep crisis like other university. Is the news of today that one Jewish parliament couldn't speak and to give a lecture yesterday in the Ca' Foscari University in Venice. But here in Ferrara, didn't happen things like this, and we keep a very strict relationship between the rectors and other professors of Ferrara, and several of our cultural projects are connecting the museum with the local university, and not just the local university. At this point, I don't think that there was a confusion between the museum and the Israeli state. Not at the moment. There are a lot of confusions in Italy. The example that I gave about the refusing of giving the speech to the Jewish ex-parliamentary is an example, just an example. But here in Ferrara, we are keeping a good relationship with the university. Perhaps what we are seeing, that with the professors we keep the good relationship, but we are seeing that the students of the university, as they are really very few of them they visit by themselves the museum. If it's in connection with a course or with their teachers.
I can't hear Amedeo anymore. I don't know if people have also lost him, but the connection I've lost the connection. Are other people hearing Amedeo? No, I think it's gone. He was answering Eva's second question, actually, about the relationship between the museum and the university. But I think we got most of what he was saying. But unfortunately, it looks like the connection has gone there. So I think this is probably a good moment to bring our event to a close and to thank all of our fantastic guests for giving us your insights into the history of this beautiful and interesting place, and also letting us know about the present day community. It certainly sounds a lovely place to live, and I know one of the things that Shmuel was encouraging in the magazine, in the piece in the magazine, he was encouraging Jews to come and settle in Ferrara. So perhaps after the talk today, you might be tempted to do that, or at least to go and visit Ferrara. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to our Executive Director, Aviva, and thank you and thank our guests again for being with us here tonight.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and a huge thank you to David, to Amedeo, to Shmuel and Diana for that fascinating introduction to Ferrara. If you've enjoyed this evening and are interested in visiting in person, I'm going to be leading two, in fact, tours. Our first dates in May proved so popular and booked so quickly, we've actually organised a repeat in September. So we're going to be doing one of our Jewish Renaissance tours to actually both Ferrara and Venice. Some of you might have seen that our previous issue had a long read about Peggy Guggenheim. So from April onwards, the Guggenheim collection has an exhibition about Peggy Guggenheim, that great Jewish collector, and her time in London. The curator of the exhibition, Grzina, will be giving us a private tour. And Peggy's daughter, Carol Vale, who has quite a defined cultural Jewish identity, not religious, but definitely cultural Jewish identity, will be meeting us in Venice. We'll be spending a day or two in the Venice ghetto. We'll be discovering some interesting historical figures. The history professor Alan Verskin is going to be talking to us about David Reubeni, the Black Jewish Messiah. I'm going to be exploring the Jewish Venetian musicians who ended up coming to England during the time of Henry VIII, and were involved with Shakespeare. We are going to be doing a little exploration of Leonardo da Vinci. There's a new book published which suggests that his mother, Caterina, was not just a peasant, but was a Jewish slave coming from the Caucasus. So that will be our time in Venice. And then, of course, we are going to spend Shabbat and have a weekend in Ferrara, hopefully with Amedeo, maybe even with Shmuel and Diana as well. We'll explore the museum, we'll do some walking tours of the Ghetto Hebraica, we'll learn a little bit about the Finzi-Continis and Giorgio Bassani, and have a wonderful time. So please do sign up and come and visit in person. And if you're interested in what JR does, we have, as you can see, a very rich and diverse program of events, of tours, and of course a wonderful magazine. Please support us, read us, donate, give gift subscriptions, and we look forward to having you as part of the JR family. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you again to our fantastic speakers who've taught us so much. Have a good evening.